The Playtime Co factory looks quiet, but inside, every corner is filled with secrets. Every experiment, every toy, every monster. None of it happened by accident. Someone trained them, someone controlled them, and that someone is Mrs. Gracie. Some experiments were obviously under her control, some were unknowingly shaped over years, and a few were conditioned to follow rules perfectly, without hesitation, and without error. In this video, we're diving deep into every experiment influenced by Mrs. Gracie. What you see in the game will never look the same again. Huggy Wuggy might seem like a monster that randomly attacks a player, but when you actually look closely at his behavior across the factory, it starts to feel like he wasn't just turned into a creature, he was trained for a specific role. Huggy behaves less like an animal and more like a living security system. When we first enter the factory in Chapter 1, Huggy is positioned at the lobby display, standing perfectly still. At first, it looks like he's just part of the attraction, a giant toy welcoming visitors into the building. But the moment the power gets restored and the player begins exploring deeper into the factory, Huggy suddenly disappears. He doesn't attack right away. Instead, he waits and he stalks you. Only when the player reaches deeper into the facility, specifically the conveyor belt room, does Huggy suddenly begin the famous chase scene. That delay is important. It shows Huggy isn't just blindly attacking. He seems to be tracking the player and waiting for the right moment, almost like something following instructions. But the biggest clue appears later in the story. At the end of Chapter 4, when the player reaches the labs, an alarm suddenly starts blaring across the entire facility. The moment this alarm goes off, Huggy Wuggy appears again and immediately starts pursuing the player. That moment is extremely important because it shows Huggy reacting directly to security alarm. That suggests Huggy may have been conditioned to respond to certain triggers inside the factory, alarms, intruders, or movement in restricted areas. If Playtime Co wanted a living security system that could hunt anyone down who broke into the facility, conditioning an experiment to react to alarms would make perfect sense. There's even a hint that the scientists had ways to control Huggy if he became too aggressive. In Chapter 5, when screens display clips of Kissy Missy, Huggy can be briefly distracted by them. This suggests Kissy may have been created as a kind of behavioral counterbalance, something that could calm Huggy down if his aggression became uncontrollable. If that's true, Huggy wasn't just created randomly, he was part of a system where experiments were trained, conditioned, and controlled to serve very specific roles inside the factory. Mommy Longlegs behaves very differently from Huggy Wuggy. She doesn't simply hunt the player. Instead, she forces the player into a series of games throughout Chapter 2. And the way she behaves during those games suggests something very interesting. Mommy seems obsessed with control. From the moment she appears, she tells the player that they must play 3 games in order to escape the game station. She sets the rules, explains the challenges, and watches the player the entire time. But the strange part is how emotional she becomes when those rules are broken. When the player escapes using the train early, Mommy becomes furious and begins chasing the player directly through the factory. She even screams about how the player cheated. That reaction feels incredibly specific. She isn't just angry because the player escaped. She's angry because the rules were broken. That suggests Mommy may have been conditioned to enforce games as part of her role in the factory. Inside Playtime Co, the game station was designed as a place where children would test toys by playing with them. If Mommy Longlegs was meant to oversee this area, she would need to ensure that children follow the rules of each activity. Her obsession with fairness and control may actually be a leftover behavior from that conditioning. Even the way she punishes failure reflects this. Instead of immediately killing the player, Mommy forces them to complete each challenge properly. She treats the entire situation like a structured activity rather than a random hunt. It's almost like she can't stop thinking of everything as a game that must be played correctly, which suggests Mommy Longlegs wasn't just created to scare intruders. She was conditioned to run the games at the game station, and when those rules are broken, her behavior spirals into rage. CatNap's conditioning might actually be one of the most disturbing examples, and the evidence for it doesn't just come from the game itself. It also appears in the Chapter 5 ARG. In the ARG footage, CatNap can be seen staring at the screens, playing different videos. These screens appear to be part of some kind of observation or conditioning process. The fact that CatNap is positioned in front of these screens strongly suggests he may have been forced to watch specific material repeatedly, possibly as part of behavioral training. And when you look at CatNap's role inside the story, that idea starts to make sense. CatNap was responsible for watching over children inside Playcare, the orphanage connected to Playtime Co. His job was essentially to keep the children calm and obedient. But the way he does this is disturbing. CatNap uses a red gas that puts people into a dreamlike state. Instead of directly controlling the children, he sedates them, making them easier to manage. That kind of behavior feels less like instinct and more like something that was deliberately taught. If CatNap was conditioned through repeated exposure to certain instructions or stimuli on those screens, it could explain why he behaves so consistently in his role. He isn't simply acting randomly, he's carrying out the behavior he was trained to perform, keeping everyone quiet, calm, and under control. Which would explain why in Chapter 3 he's lurking in the shadows and following us, almost like he's learning about our movement patterns. Boxy Boo is another experiment whose behavior suggests conditioning, especially when you look at his role in Project Playtime. Unlike some of the other toys, Boxy Boo behaves very directly like a predator that has been trained to hunt. In Project Playtime, Boxy Boo hides inside his box and waits for the perfect moment to ambush survivors. He doesn't constantly chase players the way Huggy does. Instead, he relies on patience and surprise attacks. This kind of behavior feels extremely intentional. Ambush predators in nature rely on patience and timing, but Boxy Boo's actions feel more structured than instinctual. He waits, observes, and then strikes with precision. That suggests he may have been conditioned. Playtime Co may have trained him to respond to movement or noise, teaching him when to remain hidden and when to attack. If Huggy was the factory's alarm response system, Boxy Boo may have been something closer to a trap, an experiment designed to hide in plain sight until the right moment. And considering how many experiments existed in the factory, it wouldn't be surprising if different toys were conditioned for different types of roles.